Right, let's expand the conversation with Business Leadership South Africa's CEO, Busisiwe Mavuso. A very good evening to you. Thank you so much for your time. I mean, a big part of your role, I know, is to lead the local business advisory council to assist the B20. And, we've just listened to Cascavadia speaking a bit about the hard to ignore political dynamics. I mean, how does that impact your work and as you try and initiate this platform?
So it's going to be a very interesting and difficult issue to navigate. But I think, as Kes is saying, the business of business is going to have to continue anyway, because the issues that affect us as the business community, the issues that affect the global economy, whether it's the energy transition or it's the just transition or it's the climate change or it's the digital transformation or trade issues, those are going to continue whether or not politics are actually doing what they are doing. The volatility of politics cannot stop those, and it's interesting because probably the business community might then have something to say and some policy recommendations that they can take to G20 around how do we actually start or try and navigate the global tensions that are there. Because if there's global political tensions like we're seeing at the moment, it does affect trade. I mean, if you look at what's happening at the US, for instance, the tariffs that have been imposed, not just on South Africa, but on the broader economy. What does that mean for global trade going forward? How do we actually navigate that? Is there something that these multilateral organizations like the G20 and the B20 can do, as we move towards this multipolar environment where we are seeing the strong power and strong arm politics coming into play? What is the role, of a G20 and how do we actually ensure that the global economy and global trade is actually not impacted by that? So those are the issues that we're actually going to be discussing. Someone, interestingly enough, at the B20 summit, or rather B20 conference today, spoke about the fact that the kind of tensions that you're seeing at the moment from a global perspective, we haven't seen such tensions still in 1945. So it's a very interesting time. It therefore calls upon us as the business community, as the governments that are in these multilateral organizations to say, how are we going to actually have a voice and put interventions in place that are going to ensure that we navigate this and our economies are not decimated by the time, all of this is said and done.
In having that voice, I do understand that there are a number of task forces and policy recommendations that will be developed by the B20. What exactly will that entail? And just in terms of the process and the breakdown, what are you looking at?
So the 6 task forces that we have that have been there in all the previous B20s, a task force around trade and investment, a task force around finance and infrastructure, one around digital transformation, one around energy transition and climate change, one around integrity and compliance, as well as another one around employment and education. So those are the 6 that are always there each year, irrespective of which country is hosting the B20. And the 2 that we've decided to add as South Africa, because then as a host country, you do have an opportunity to amplify issues that you think are important to you as an economy and the broader continent. We decided to add sustainable food systems and agriculture, as well as the industrialization and innovation in emerging economies. So when you look at, even if you just put the 2 aside, when you look at the other ones that are always there on a year-to-year basis, I don't think there is a way in which we can have a conversation, for instance, around trade and investment without talking about what's happening in the world today, the global economic tensions that we actually see, the volatility that is actually happening, the fragmentation that we're actually seeing. So the task force is made up by about 150 or 200 business leaders who are coming from all these 21 countries that are member organizations of the G20. So it's not just a South African conversation. The only thing that we actually preside or that we have as South Africa is that we have an opportunity to therefore chair these task forces. But the work that is being done, the policy recommendations that are actually going to be coming out, the processing of that information and the conversations that are actually going to be held, all the member countries are actually going to be participating. So when all is said and done, and when we put together policy recommendations, it's not just going to be South Africa's views, it's going to be, everyone that is actually in the task force. But because we are chairing these task forces, it gives us an opportunity to can shape the conversation, to can influence the conversation, and to can be very deliberate about how we highlight and put at the top of the agenda some of the issues that affect us as South Africa, broader continent, and the broader global South, as Kes said.
Then what kind of opportunities does this now bring to the table for South Africa?
So, as I said, it gives us an opportunity to chair the conversation and to shape the conversation and to actually make sure that the issues that are affecting the global South and the issues that are affecting the broader continent are actually brought to the fore. Because then maybe if you think about in the context maybe of digital transformation, we often speak about the digital divide that is there in South Africa. The many people that are actually still struggling, to access connectivity, depending on where they are actually sitting. And this is not just a South African thing. It's a continent thing. It's a global South thing. So probably maybe something can be said around how do we leverage on the technologies and maybe on the support from developed economies, from your UK, from your China, from your Japan, from your Australia, from your all the EU, all the other economies that are actually there in the G20. How do we actually leverage from them to ensure that the broader African continent and the broader global South can therefore have easy access to technology, right? How do we actually get their help in ensuring that we can actually accelerate digitization? Because remember, they're also looking at us as markets, because Africa is the biggest growing continent, or rather the fastest growing continent in the world. So if they're going to be looking for markets at Africa, how do they then help us, to be at the level that we're supposed to be, as a continent, so that then we actually make sense to be the market that they need us to be. So really those are the issues that it's global issues, but they do impact South Africa. They do impact the continent. They do impact the global South. And I think we're just going to have to find a way of how we actually ensure that the broader G20 and the other leaders understand, what the African continent is struggling with, and how we can leverage the opportunities and the help that they can provide to the rest of us.
Very well. So when it comes to presenting this to the G20, what are the plans and how will that be working?
So the presentation to the G20 is going to be happening in November at the summit. Where after we've done all of this work, we put together three recommendations that we're actually going to give to the G20 for their consideration. One of the issues, for instance, is the issue around CBAM. CBAM is the levy or the tax that is being imposed by EU on all the goods that we're actually exporting to the EU. And when you look at a lot of African companies, they will tell you that EU is their biggest market. So because of this issue of climate change and the decarbonization agenda, EU is saying Africa and South Africa, a lot of your products have high carbon content. You have to reduce the carbon content. If the carbon content in your product is not low, we are going to have to start charging you a tax. But then it's not an issue for Africa only, it's an issue for some of the European countries. So one of the recommendations, for instance, could be that let's speak to the EU so that they actually delay the imposition of this tax. It mustn't put or take effect, for instance, in the next 2 to 3 years. We need some time to go through the just transition. We need some time to reduce the carbon content in our products, because our electricity is still coal-based, and so is the rest of the European, continent, as it were. So let's ensure that EU can maybe give us some time, to actually deal with the just transition and reduce the carbon content. So those are some of the issues, for instance, that we're going to be dealing with. And we hope that when all is said and done, South Africa will tell their story so that then we can position ourselves for the investment that we need so that we can be able to grow the economy. I think that is what is at the heart of this for South Africa.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for speaking to us this evening, wrapping up that conversation with Business Leadership South Africa CEO Busisiwe Mavuso.